The night began like any other long workday. But something about it felt unsettled from the start, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Ethan Miller stayed late at the downtown Chicago office, finishing reports under the soft hum of fluorescent lights, thinking only about getting home and resting his tired mind. Most of the staff had already left, and the building felt hollow, echoes following every step. As he packed his bag and headed toward the elevator, he noticed someone sitting alone in the lobby. It was Claire Coleman, his boss's wife, dressed neatly but with an exhaustion that showed in her posture. She looked up, surprised, then gave a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Outside, rain streaked down the tall glass windows, turning the city lights into blurred colors. Claire stood and explained almost apologetically that her driver had canceled at the last minute and her phone battery was nearly dead. She hesitated before asking if Ethan could drive her home. The request was simple, reasonable, and Ethan agreed without thinking much of it, telling himself it was just a courtesy. As they walked to the parking garage, the air smelled like rain and concrete, and neither of them spoke. Once inside the car, the silence grew heavier than expected. Not awkward, but thoughtful, as if both were aware that this ordinary moment carried something unfamiliar. Ethan focused on the road as rain tapped steadily against the windshield, while Claire gazed out the window, watching reflections of traffic lights slide across the glass. A few minutes passed before she spoke, her voice calm but edged with something deeper, saying how strange it felt to be in the city so late, surrounded by people, yet feeling alone. Ethan answered carefully, sharing that long hours often made him feel disconnected too. As if life moved forward while he stood still. There. Conversation picked up speed naturally, moving from small talk to honest thoughts without effort. Claire mentioned how people often assumed her life was perfect. Married to a successful man, living in a beautiful home, attending events that looked impressive from the outside. She paused, then quietly admitted that perfection could be lonely. When it left no room to breathe, Ethan listened, surprised by her openness. Sensing that she wasn't complaining but releasing something she'd carried for a long time. He shared his own quiet frustrations, dreams he had set aside, and the pressure of always trying to prove himself at work. The car felt smaller as their words filled it, not with romance, but with recognition. Two people realizing they weren't as different as they'd assumed. The rain grew heavier, traffic slowed, and time seemed to stretch. Claire asked Ethan if he believed people ended up where they were meant to be, or if life was just a series of accidents. He thought for a moment, before answering that sometimes accidents revealed truths people tried to avoid. She smiled faintly at that, then fell silent again. When they reached her neighborhood, the streets were calm, lined with quiet homes glowing warmly from inside, a sharp contrast to the tension she carried. Ethan pulled up in front of her house and turned off the engine, expecting the moment to end quickly. But Claire didn't reach for the door right away. She thanked him for the ride, then added that she hadn't realized how much she needed to talk until that moment. Ethan nodded, unsure what to say, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He assured her it was no trouble, just a drive, nothing more. Yet even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. As Claire finally stepped out into the rain, she paused and looked back at him, her expression thoughtful, almost questioning. Before closing the door gently, Ethan watched her walk toward the house, rain soaking her coat, and something shifted inside him, subtle but undeniable. As he drove away, the streets looked different, sharper, louder, his thoughts racing faster than the car itself. He told himself it was just a conversation, just kindness exchanged on a rainy night. But deep down he sensed that something had begun. Not an affair or a mistake, but a question that refused to be ignored. That single drive, meant to be forgotten by morning, stayed with him, echoing in his mind long after the rain stopped, hinting that ordinary choices sometimes open doors people never planned to walk through. After that night, Ethan told himself to return to normal. Yet normal refused to come back. Days moved quickly at the office, meetings blending into emails. But every time he walked through the lobby, he half expected to see Claire sitting there again. When she did appear a week later, it caught him off guard. She was there for a short visit, waiting for Richard, and their eyes met with a recognition that felt too clear to ignore. They exchanged a polite greeting, nothing more, but the memory of that rainy drive lingered between them. Over the following weeks, these brief encounters became more frequent. Sometimes Claire arrived during lunch hours, sometimes late in the afternoon, and each time they spoke a little longer than before. Their conversations stayed safe on the surface at first, about work stress, the city, and books they enjoyed. Yet there was a quiet comfort in talking that made time pass faster. Ethan noticed how Claire listened closely, as if his words mattered more than they should have, and she seemed to notice the same in him. One evening, they found themselves alone near the office coffee area, the building almost empty again, and Claire spoke with a softer voice, admitting that she often felt invisible in her own life. She explained how her marriage had slowly turned into a routine filled with schedules and expectations, but missing warmth. Ethan didn't interrupt or offer advice, understanding that she wasn't looking for solutions, only honesty. He shared his own sense of being stuck, of working hard yet feeling like his real life was always waiting somewhere in the future. The pace of their connection quickened without them planning it, turning small talks into meaningful exchanges that felt natural rather than forced. One late afternoon, Rain returned to the city, and Claire hesitated before asking Ethan for another ride, saying she hoped it wasn't an inconvenience. He agreed instantly, surprised by how easily the decision came. Inside the car, the conversation flowed faster than before, moving from shared frustrations to memories of who they once wanted to be. Claire spoke about her younger self, full of hope and curiosity, and how she sometimes wondered where that version of her had gone. Ethan admitted that he often measured his life by expectations rather than happiness, and saying it out loud made him realize how tired he was of doing that. The drive felt shorter than the first time, not because of distance, but because neither wanted it to end. When they reached her home, Claire turned toward him, her expression serious yet calm, and thanked him again, adding that these talks made her feel less alone. Ethan felt a pull in that moment, a quiet attraction built on understanding rather than desire, and it unsettled him. He reminded himself who she was and where the line stood, even as his thoughts betrayed him. Over the next days, he noticed how often she crossed his mind, not in a reckless way, but as someone who had seen him clearly. Claire, too, seemed affected, her smiles warmer, her presence lingering longer whenever they spoke. There were no hidden messages or secret meetings, yet the emotional closeness grew faster than either expected. One afternoon, as they stood near the office window watching the city move below, Claire admitted that she looked forward to their conversations more than she should. Ethan felt his heart race, knowing the weight of those words, and answered carefully that he felt the same but understood the situation made it complicated. They stood in silence after that, aware that something real had formed between them. Something fragile and dangerous if mishandled. That night, Ethan went home restless, replaying every word, every glance, questioning his judgment and his heart at the same time. He realized this was no longer just a friendly connection born from chance, but a growing bond that demanded attention. Part of him wanted to step back before things became harder, while another part feared losing the one person who made him feel truly heard. As days passed, that tension followed him everywhere, tightening with each shared moment, leading him toward a choice he wasn't ready to face but could no longer avoid. The night that changed everything arrived suddenly, unannounced, with no warning that life was about to test their restraint. Richard was out of town on a business trip, and the office had emptied early, leaving the city quiet and rainy once again. Claire called Ethan unexpectedly, her voice shaking slightly, and asked if he could come by, not for a ride this time, but just to talk. She sounded vulnerable, and he knew that this wasn't casual. She needed someone to listen without judgment. He drove through the wet streets, heart racing with anticipation and a sense of caution, aware that tonight could be the turning point of everything. When he arrived, Claire opened the door quickly, almost nervously, and invited him inside. The apartment was quiet and warmly lit, a contrast to the storm outside, and it felt different from the office encounters. As they sat across from each other on the living room couch, the tension that had been simmering for weeks surfaced immediately. Claire spoke softly, explaining how she didn't feel like herself anymore, how life with Richard had turned into routines, schedules, and polite conversation that never reached her heart. Ethan listened, careful not to interrupt, recognizing the depth of her pain and the trust she placed in him simply by sharing it. He admitted his own struggles, how work and responsibility often left him feeling disconnected, how he longed for something real and honest in his daily life. Their voices filled the room, quiet but intense, and for a moment, the outside world seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them and the unspoken bond that had been building. When Claire's voice broke with quiet emotion, Ethan instinctively reached out to offer a tissue, his hand brushing hers briefly. That touch, small and accidental, carried more weight than either expected, a spark that made them both pause and realize how close they had become emotionally. They looked at each other, aware of the unspoken possibilities and the lines that could not be crossed. And in that charged silence, they understood that the connection between them was no longer just friendly. Claire pulled back first, standing and reminding him gently that what they felt was real but complicated, that boundaries existed for a reason, and that she wasn't willing to cross them. Ethan nodded, though his heart ached, knowing she was. Right? He left the apartment with a heavy chest, rain blurring the streets, every light reflecting his restless thoughts. That night he replayed every moment, every word, every glance, aware that one small decision could have changed everything. In the following days they avoided discussing that night directly, but the awareness of their closeness lingered in. Every interaction, their conversations at the office remained careful, polite, professional, but beneath the surface. An unspoken tension pulsed, reminding them of what could have happened and what they had restrained. Each smile, each thoughtful glance carried more meaning than it should, and both felt the weight of restraint pressing down like a storm waiting to break. Ethan realized that the feelings he had for Claire were no longer fleeting or simple. They were deep, complicated by circumstance, responsibility, and timing. Yet he could not deny the connection. The way she made him feel understood and alive, the way she listened and responded as if she had known him for years. Claire, too, felt it, though she fought it, reminding herself of commitments and the careful balance she needed to maintain in life. The following week brought brief glances, quiet smiles, and attention that neither could ignore. Each encounter reminded them of that night, the words shared, the emotions exposed, and the restraint required to keep the situation intact. They both understood the danger of missteps, the fragility of trust, and the consequences that could follow if either allowed the bond to grow unchecked. Yet, despite knowing the risks, neither could fully step back. The connection had taken root in a way that was impossible to ignore, growing stronger with every thoughtful exchange, every shared moment of understanding. Ethan found himself replaying her words constantly, thinking about the way she looked, at him when she spoke, how her vulnerability revealed a side of her no one else saw. Claire felt the same pull, the magnetic tension between caution and desire, awareness and longing, realizing that their connection was rare and meaningful. By the end of the week, both were forced to confront a truth they had tried to avoid, that whatever had begun was real, powerful, and emotionally transformative. And the question was no longer whether they felt something for each other, but what they would do with that knowledge, how they would navigate it without crossing lines that could never be uncrossed, and whether patience could truly hold them apart when their hearts refused to listen. Weeks passed after the night that had tested both Ethan and Claire, and life seemed to shift quietly around them. Like the city moving under the rhythm of rain and lights, carrying changes neither had expected. Ethan returned to work each day, aware that his thoughts often strayed to Claire, and though he tried to remain focused, the memory of their conversations and shared vulnerability lingered in ways that made ordinary office life feel muted. Then came the news that Richard had resigned from the company, an event that surprised everyone and created a ripple of uncertainty. Ethan learned later that the resignation was part of a decision Richard and Claire had made together quietly, months in advance, a choice to separate respectfully without scandal or conflict. The revelation gave Ethan a new perspective on the months of tension he had experienced. And he realized that much of the weight he had felt had been tied to the unseen boundaries Claire maintained, not to any inappropriate choices. One rainy afternoon, a few weeks after the resignation, Ethan ran into Claire downtown at a small cafe she had begun visiting. She looked different, lighter, more relaxed, a calmness in her smile that suggested she was reclaiming parts of herself she had lost during the challenges in her marriage. They sat across from each other with coffee in hand, and for the first time in months, there was no hesitation, no restraint. Only the honesty of two people who had grown through shared experiences and emotional understanding. Claire spoke about rebuilding her life, about the freedom of making choices for herself. And Ethan listened, feeling a sense of relief mixed with admiration for her courage. The conversation flowed naturally, fast-paced, moving from past reflections to hopes for the future, their voices overlapping at times as excitement and genuine connection grew between them. Ethan realized that the bond they had formed over weeks of careful conversation and shared moments of vulnerability had matured into something deep and lasting, not built on secrecy or fleeting emotion, but on understanding, patience, and timing. Claire admitted that she had felt a strong sense of support from Ethan during difficult moments. And though it had been tempting to let the connection move faster, she valued the respect and honesty that had kept them grounded. Ethan shared similar feelings, recognizing that their relationship had grown in a way that allowed trust and care to flourish without crossing lines that could hurt anyone. Over the next months, they began spending more time together in safe, public walks. In the park, visits to bookstores, casual lunches downtown, each encounter strengthening the connection without the pressure of secrecy or impropriety. The emotional tension that had defined their interactions gradually transformed into companionship and subtle affection, a recognition that they were kindred spirits in ways that went beyond attraction. One evening, as the sun set over the Chicago skyline, they walked side by side along the river, talking about future plans and the small joys they wanted to pursue. And Ethan felt a sense of clarity he had not known in years. He realized that the first rainy ride, the late-night conversations, and the moments of shared vulnerability had not been mistakes or temptations, but steps leading to something authentic, meaningful, and allowed to exist openly. Claire's eyes reflected the same understanding, the acknowledgement that life could present unexpected connections that demanded patience and respect before blooming into something real. As the weeks turned into months, their bond continued to deepen, marked by shared laughter, thoughtful conversations, and moments of quiet reflection that confirmed the trust and emotional intimacy they had built. Neither rushed the process, and neither looked back with regret, knowing that every choice they had made to respect boundaries and wait had strengthened the foundation of their relationship. Eventually, Ethan understood that the drive home months earlier had been more than a simple act of kindness. It had been the opening of a door to a connection neither had anticipated, a catalyst for growth, understanding, and the possibility of genuine love. Claire, too, recognized that the careful navigation of their feelings had allowed her to rediscover herself and her ability to trust, to hope, and to embrace a future that felt fully her own. By the time they shared a quiet evening discussing dreams for the next year, There was no lingering fear or hesitation, only appreciation for the journey they had taken together and the patience that had made it possible. Their story had begun with a moment of unexpected vulnerability, had tested boundaries and emotions, and had matured into a connection built on respect, honesty, and emotional courage, proving that timing, patience, and understanding could transform chance encounters into meaningful, life-changing experiences. Ethan and Claire had arrived at a place where their bond was no longer defined by what could have been, but by what it had become. A relationship rooted in mutual respect, genuine care, and the unspoken promise of trust and companionship, moving forward, showing that even ordinary moments, handled with honesty and patience, can change everything in ways people never imagine.